Hello and welcome to video 2 of learning C# fundamentals from scratch. Once again, my name is Alex Horton, and today we're going to be learning about the syntax of C#. Some basic things that we need to know about C# syntax, what keywords are, what a variable is, and a few other things. My goal is to try to keep these videos below 20 minutes long. So again, we're going to be learning about variables, what an identifier is, keywords and literals. We're going to learn what it means to declare, assign, and initialize variables. We're going to look at local variables, which is var versus type variables like string or int. We're going to look at constants, keywords, and code blocks. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to build upon the Hello World 2 application that we were using before in the previous video. And so right now what we're going to do, and actually let's do this instead. Let's start over from scratch. Let's close the Hello World solution and let's create a brand new project. We're going to call it a class library, and we're going to call this variables. We'll call it syntax solution. And down here in the solution name, we're going to call it syntax solution app. Okay. Say OK. And so, yet again, we're going to create or rename our class. Call it syntax class. Yep. So, the first thing we're going to identify is what a variable is. So what is a variable? Basically, variables are things that store information or data. If you declared a variable in your data or in your program, it's going to store information there in some way, shape, or form. If you're going to store a sentence of string data, you're going to make a string variable. If you're going to store numbers or things that are going to change that you need to add or subtract or do some kind of a math kind of a function on, you're going to make it an integer or a float or a decimal. If you're going to do true or falses, you're going to use a Boolean. So let's look at a few of the different types of variables that are out there. So variables in C# are among, there's a gamut of different variables out there in C#. Let me see it that way. And so variables are going to store, like I said, like-minded data, or the data that you're going to need. There's different types of variables. There's integral types of variables, such as bytes and shorts and longs and ints. Those are integers and numbers. There's floating point type variables, which are going to have decimal points, or they're going to be numbers that float with some accuracy in there. There's decimal type points, decimal type variables, which are going to be decimals. You're going to have decimal points in there. You're going to do for numbers or currency. Booleans and nullable types as well. So let's just create a few variables here. So in our syntax solution class, we're going to create some public variables. Now, we'll talk about keywords here in a moment, but we're going to create an access modifier variable called, actually we're going to create a variable called, well, let's create a number variable. So let's do int, and what we're going to do is we'll create this as variable 1. And it doesn't like that, and the reason why is, well, I guess my compiler's going a little slow. So this public keyword is a keyword, and we'll get into keywords here momentarily. But what this variable does is if you hover over it, you'll see that this variable is an integer, which means I can put only numbers into this variable. Okay, so let's do this, and we're going to do some comment lines as well. So comment lines, single line comment lines are double slashes, like you see there. And this is going to be an integer. Let's do another one. Public string variable, or let's call it string var. And this is a string variable. And what this means is this variable, I can put letters and numbers in together as long as it is followed by, or when I assign it, it's assigned in the way that you would assign literals to a string variable. So for example, if I'd said string var equals 20, that is assigning a value to a string variable. Now if, let's say, and let me rename this variable one to int1, int var. Let's call it int var. So if I want to assign a number to this variable, I'll say equals 1. And you'll notice that in this variable, it's a number, and in this one, it's a string, or a string of data, or a literal string of data. Okay? Well, let's flip-flop them. If I put this here and I put 1, I get rid of that and I put 20. Watch what C# does. It says, you cannot take a string and make it an integer. So in the previous lesson, I said that C# is a statically typed language, or it's a very strong type language. It means that C# will not let you do something like this. Okay? So you have to keep integers and numbers. If you whatever you declare your variable as, you got to keep it as that type of variable, or you've got to cast your variables a certain way, just like that. And you'll notice that our compiler stops barking about it. So let's do another one. Let's do var. Var. Let's do public var. And you notice I'm trying to do a var, and var doesn't work because some var. It won't let me do a var because you can't do locally typed variables outside of functions and methods and stuff like that, because they're gonna run at that time and they're not gonna be used again. So let's get rid of that one. There's floats. Float var equals 0.0f for float. So that shows us that we have a floating point variable. Okay. I'm gonna hit my microphone here, y'all. Double is also a floating point variable. I think it's got a D in there. Is it D for double? I can never remember the double. Okay. And then you've also got decimals. Something like that. I think I've got that double wrong. We'll find out here in a minute. And you don't want to have a leading zero. There we go. And it says it doesn't like that, so I think this is the one right here. There we go, 0.00m, something like that. And then you've got Boolean type variables. Bool var equals false. And this is a Boolean. And then you have nullable data type vars, right? So a nullable data type variable is a variable that can be set to a null string. So like this string up here, I can say string var like that. And I can only do that inside of a function or a subroutine. So, but nullable type variables are things that they can either return null or you can set them to null. And null is there's nothing in them, right? So like, for example, if I came up here and I set the string var, instead of it being at 20, say I wanted to set it to null, like that, right? So that means that string var has nothing in it, right? I can do that there. I can't set float var to a null because it's a numeric value. It's got to have a number in there, right? So there's booleans and so on and so forth, right? So I can null strings, and but I'm not going to do that in this instance. I'll put that 20 back in there. Okay. Now, our syntax, so we talked a little bit about variables. Let's talk about identifiers. What an identifier is basically the name of the variable that you created. Nice and simple, right? Literals are these right here, is what we talked about here. So this is a string literal. It's something that's not going to change, or it could be a constant. So let's talk about that in a minute. But literals, keywords, and identifiers are all things that you're going to have a literal variable. So this is a literal variable right here, string var. And I can go out and I can change string var, but it's defaulted to a literal value of 20. Okay. And actually, let's do it this way. Joe Smith, something like that, right? That's a literal variable. So if I didn't change this variable at all during the runtime of my application, it's going to continue to be Joe Smith. Okay. Going back, keywords. Let's talk about keywords here in a minute for a second here. So keywords are very, keywords are something in C# that don't get enough attention at times. People just use them and they don't know what they are. So keywords are restricted words inside of C# that you can't use as variable names. You can't use them, for specific variable purposes. I'm probably not explaining that the right way. So keywords, let me go to what a keyword would look like. So let me type in here C# keywords, and I've got a link to all of the keywords that are in the doc, or in this particular, are here. I've got a link to this. So these are all of the keywords in C# that have reserved identifiers, which means that you can't use them. So you can't call a variable bool, right? So I can't go in here and I can't say public bool, because you see it turns blue. It's expecting it to be a keyword, right? And you can't do that kind of stuff. So the reserved words that are used by C# that you can use. Now, you can use these for a specific purpose, right? There's contextual keywords as well. which means they have specific meaning in the code, like select and set, and like we talked about var earlier, right? So they have multiple uses, but these keywords up here, you can't really use them all. You can't use them to name something, right? So like int, we talked about int. Int is a keyword that identifies that right after that, you're going to make a number variable, okay? So we talked about a little bit about variables, okay? Now let's talk a little bit about declaring, assigning, and initializing variables. So to initialize a variable, we've declared a variable here by using a keyword, typing an identifier, and setting or assigning that variable a value. Okay. This leads me into operators. And so the operator to set a variable is just this equals. So think of it that way. So if something equals something, then it's something, right? Just like that. You know, these are all variable associations where we've assigned something to a variable. So later on in my code, let's say I have a piece of a subroutine or a function. Let's call it string sum. Let's call it string sum function. And actually, let's do a void. It doesn't like that because it does like that. Okay, so then let's say in this subroutine, now that I've declared these variables, I can use them because they're declared in memory. So I can come in here and say int var equals 10. Or I can say string var equals nope. Or I can say bool var equals true now. So you can see that these variables are now, once you declare them and they're in memory, you can reuse them. Now let's go back to the var. So the var keyword, what it allows you to do is, if you don't know what your variable type is going to be when you first create it or what you're going to get back, this is where the var keyword is very handy. So let's say you're coding something and you're expecting a response back from a web service hit, right? But you don't know what the syntax of your code is going to be, or of your return is going to be. Var makes it easy, and you declare it just like any other variable. Var sum var equals, and whatever you put into var is what the var becomes. So if you put string into this var, you'll see that it's a string, right? And now I can come down here, I can say sum var equals yes. And you'll see that sum var is now a string. Okay. And that's saying that the little green squiggly line says, hey, you've created a variable, but you're not using the variable for anything. All right. So you can do that in conditionals. I don't think I'm going to make my 20-minute time frame here. So that's what var allows you to do. So let's say I want to, instead of it being sum var, like a number, a string variable, I'll make it a 0 instead. Now it turns into an integer, right? Or let's say it's a Boolean. Now it's a Boolean. That's where var, it comes in handy, right? If you don't know the type of data that you're going to be storing. Trying to stay on topic here. Local variables versus type variables. We talked a little bit about that earlier, right? And in this function, I can actually come down here and I can say string sum string equals my string. Now, this local string variable, if I wanted to use this later on, I couldn't because it's only available in this code block. What a code block is everything that's inside of these curly braces represents a block of code that is being executed by this subroutine somehow, right? So that's all a code block is. It's just a gathering of code that they're gonna run, right? So again, what you're going to do is you're going to create your code line by line inside of a code block, and then you'd run that code or compile that code. Let me go back to my constants. Let's talk about constants real quick because I'm trying not to run out of time here. What a constant is a variable or a constant that is never going to change. It is great for storing something that you're not going to use you don't have to change the value of it. So let's say public constant my constant equals something like that, right? Let's say XYZ. Oh, let's do it actually down here. Right, and so that means that, it's saying it doesn't like it. So let's look at our code and see what's going on here. So it's expecting something here, right? So let's see, and then if you click on this, if you click on this code, what it does is it'll give you an idea of what your what you want it to look like. So let's go into using constants. C#, right? So a constant would be used like we see here, right? So for example, what I'm missing here by design is the type of constant that I'm trying to use. So I'm trying to cast this constant as a string. So let me move it back up here. Put the public keyword in front of it and put a string there. And watch that error go bye-bye. So now I can come into here and I can say my const, and I can't set my const to anything else because it's always going to be XYZ, right? I can't do that because if you hover over that, it says that it has to be something. It has to be something that you're creating a new constant. But what I can do is I can do this. And that will display my const as XYZ in my console. Okay. So let's go back to our. So we're talking about constants and then keywords, right? So keywords are things that you're going to use that, again, mean something to C#, and you can only use them if you are using them in the way that C# expects you to. Okay. So these keywords, for example, abstract and char and if and interface and all of these here, what they allow you to do is they allow you to use those keywords in the context that the keyword is meant for. Right. So for example, enumerator or enum allows you to create an enumeration, which gives you, like for example, this day. If I let me copy this code here and I'll show you what that does. Okay. So what this does is it allows me, if I go to day, and if you see Friday, Monday, you see how it puts numbers on the days there. This being 0, 1, 2, 3. So that is a keyword that is used for a specific purpose. And that's why you can't say string enum, because you're using a keyword. So if you want to know about keywords, I put a link in this video description here and to this particular page, and it tells you what all these keywords do. Okay. Lastly, we talked about a little bit about code blocks. And again, code blocks are going to be contained inside of the curly braces here and inside of curly braces here. Right. So you'll see inside of curly braces here. So this is a class, or this is a C# class that I'm going to use for a specific purpose. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to design a class for a specific purpose. And then what we're going to do is utilize that class as part of an application and see how we're going to build an application still from scratch, but we're learning as we go. So if I kind of seem like it's a little scatterbrained or whatever, forgive me. Please put comments in the descriptions down below, and we can go over those particular topics that I see, in the descriptions a little bit more in detail. Till then, God bless.